All right, my friends. So when we left off in history the last time, we learned about the Folsom people, which were our earliest kind of recorded people in Colorado. So we learned about the Folsom Point. We learned about the kill site where they found the bones and the different evidence of the Folsom people in this area. So today we're going to move on a little bit in time. So we're just going to travel through, just a few thousand years in one lesson. So what this picture is showing you here is to kind of bring about the idea that not only was our planet changing at this time, but the people living on our planet were also changing. So the way people lived began to change. The large game animals gradually died out, possibly because of warmer temperatures or because hunters killed too many of them. And with the large game mostly gone, these hunting nomadic people had to search for new kinds of food. So as you can see in this picture here, we have people setting up more permanent structures. So now humans are starting to stay more in one place. They're starting to do more fishing. They're starting to do more hunting of small animals and animals that they can find in the area where they've chosen to live. So if we think about kind of globally during this time, so not just in Colorado, but globally during this time, we had many great civilizations kind of growing and changing. So not only just focusing on our small part of the world here in Colorado, but thinking about other parts of the world where we have the Aztecs and the Mayans, and we have people in Egypt, and we have people who are building these great civilizations over time. And so these are just a couple of images to help you think about how globally in the world, lots of changes to humanity were happening. So people were staying in one place, people were building civilizations, they were farming, growing their own food, of course, still hunting food, but taking care of themselves within their groups and within their civilizations. During this time, we also had early explorers coming from Europe, coming to kind of explore this idea of this new land or the new world, which would have been the Americas and more specifically North America, which is of course where we're going to zero in on or focus on with our studies about Colorado. So in the early 1000s, so if we're thinking about years now, we can think about, and later in this paragraph, it talks about the 1400s. So early in the 1000s, explorers from Norway began to travel to the America in search of riches. Later in the 1400s, European explorers began to explore the area as well. So we might think about or connect to a notable explorer from this time as being Christopher Columbus. So one of those early explorers to come across North America. But something I want you to remember is that during this time, of course, there were people living in North America. So during this time of all of these early explorers, we had humans and there were native people who were living in North America. And those people, we know them to be as Native Americans or Native peoples. So let's take a moment to think about who would have been living in the Americas during the time of the early explorers. And as you can see in these pictures here, those are our Native people or our Native Americans. In Colorado, the Arapaho and the Ute tribes were the most prominent. That means that here in Colorado, those were the two tribes that were the largest and that we had the most of in this area. The Ute peoples lived mostly up in the mountains and in the foothills, and the Arapaho people lived right here where you and I live today. So what I think is really cool about the Arapaho is they settled in this valley or in this area right here, tucked in between the foothills of the Rocky Mountains and the plains of Colorado. So if we look at our map here, we can actually see the Cache la Poudre River right here. And this, of course, is our Larimer County right here. So this is where we live. And this is also where these tribes chose to set up villages. And if you think a little bit about what they would have needed for survival, one thing I'm thinking of, I see in this picture here, and I see it in this picture here, and that's water. So the Arapaho people chose this valley for their kind of tribal lands or their areas to set up their villages because it had everything they needed. There were animals to hunt here. There was water for them to drink and to wash and to cook with. And the Arapaho found this a very a very content or a very nice place to live. So much so that they called it the Valley of Contentment, because they felt as though this was the place that they could really raise their children and build these tribes together. So just a quick little timeline here, just to kind of help you understand what was happening here. So we had some ancient people here, the ancient Puebloans, which I'm not going to go a lot into, but if you guys want to do more study about those, you can look up Mesa Verde, which is, you can find information online about that. And those were some of our early Native people. And then, of course, we had the growth of the Arapaho and the Ute and the Navajo tribes. And this is ongoing, right? And then we have these European explorers who, of course, came to North America during the time that the Native Americans were here. So this kind of just gives you an idea of what was happening during these periods of time. 1492, of course, is when Columbus made kind of hit land here. 1776 is when our country became a country. So that just to give you some points of reference on years there. Later on in our history, in our study later on this week, we are going to be looking at some of the early settlers. Those early settlers came in about the 1800s. So just to show you kind of some of the overlap here. So we're also going to talk a little bit this week about Horsetooth. So you can see these images here. Of course, if we were in school, we would have a discussion about what do you see here? Does this look familiar? Where have you seen this before? But of course, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you this is Horsetooth Rock. There is a legend around Horsetooth Rock that either Miss Campbell will read to you or I will post along with this lesson. That is pretty interesting. That was written by a group of Native people that I think is pretty interesting. Well, not necessarily written, but told by a group of Native people. So here you can see some pictures of some Arapaho people. Of course, these would be from back in the 1800s. So I see some black and white photographs here, which tells my historian brain that these are from the past, as is this one. This is actually a more present day picture to kind of give you the idea that there are still Arapaho people who live today whose ancestors were the original Arapaho people who lived on these lands. Of course, they don't live, most of them, in their traditional ways anymore, but they do have gatherings and they have groups where you can go and you can learn about their culture. So thinking about the idea of the Valley of Contentment. So the Arapaho came through here and they saw buffalo, they saw land, they saw a protected area that was protected from the weather by the mountains. They saw a river, which provided them water. And then they also found trees, which provided them with the sticks and the wood that they needed to build their camps and to build their teepees. So thinking about why those Arapaho came through here and said, hey, this is the place where I want to stay. So instead of moving around a bunch, they've now decided that this is the place where they would like to stay. So this just kind of gives you an idea, my little drawing of the Poudre River coming through here, and this idea of the Arapaho living here first. And we're going to dig in a little bit later in the next lesson about the settlers that came through. So those would have been mostly European or white people that were coming through and wanting to move into this area. So knowing that the Arapaho are already here, and then we had some settlers that wanted to come in and move into this area, and kind of the conflict and the things that happened when those settlers were trying to move into this area where the Arapaho were already living. So I'm also going to teach you about Chief Friday. Chief Friday is a gentleman who you are going to learn about in today's video, which you're going to watch on our Fort Collins Before. Chief Friday was a very interesting gentleman. So he was actually found in 1831. So Chief Friday is an Arapaho. He was an Arapaho boy, and he was actually out wandering the plains and was found by an English gentleman named Thomas Fitzpatrick. Thomas Fitzpatrick was actually from Missouri, and he was traveling through here and found Chief Friday, whose name was not Friday at the time, but found him out kind of wandering the plains on his own. He was actually with a couple of other kids. And Thomas Fitzpatrick adopted him. So he actually took him, which of course now would not really work, but in 1831 it was okay to do. So Thomas Fitzpatrick took the boy with him and took him back to Missouri. So the most interesting thing about Friday is that he grew up in an English household. So he was an Arapaho boy who went to school and learned English as a language, learned math, learned science. So he was able to go to school unlike other Arapaho children. He actually later came back to this area and reunited or reconnected with his Arapaho family. And he became a translator and a negotiator for the Arapaho. So what that means is he was able to work with the Arapaho people and the white settlers and the army that were coming through here at this time to kind of help with some of the conflict that was happening. So in the video today, they're actually going to talk to you about some of that conflict and kind of what was happening at this time, and how Chief Friday, with his ability to speak English, was able to help these two groups of people come together and kind of come to an agreement. Now, we will learn later that that agreement was not necessarily the best thing for the Arapaho people, as many of them were forced off of their lands, which we are going to learn about. So Chief Friday was an Arapaho boy. He learned English, was able to go to school as an Arapaho boy, and then later reconnected with his family. So I find that really fascinating that as an Arapaho, he was able to come back and then still continue to work for his people and to help his people. There's actually a library in town with a kind of a memorial to him where you will see this statue out front. It's Council Tree Library, which is down on the south end of town. These two pictures here, you can see Chief Friday here, and then you can see him here in the middle. And these are both actual photographs of him when he was an adult and after he came back to this area. Let me make sure. So yes. Okay. So what I want you guys to do is you will now jump on to the Fort Collins Before videos, and I want you to watch video 2, which is about the Native Americans. So you should have already watched video 1, which was about early peoples. And then today you're going to watch video 2, which is about Native Americans. Thanks for listening today, guys.